listeners.
All right, let's begin with your just released Human Rights Manifesto ahead of Malawi's elections. Maybe you can start by telling us why you felt it so important to release this report now.
Peter, as Amnesty, we really felt that elections are a time for all actors, especially political actors and government, to reflect on their human rights record. It's a chance for them to break away from the past and really make a new commitment and take action to prioritize human rights. But also, it's a time where the government really has to ensure respect for human rights before, during, and after elections. It's really an opportunity for governments to put in place measures where people can really meaningfully enjoy their human rights and people can experience an improvement in their lives. But also, an election context, as we've seen in many parts of the continent and even beyond, we find that because of the desire to hold on to power, we see people being restricted from enjoying their right to freedom of assembly, their right to freedom of expression. In the context of Malawi, for example, we've heard reports of when people assemble being attacked by unknown persons, but then police failing to protect them. So this is an important time for people to be able to enjoy their right to vote in a context that has peace and where they can just really freely enjoy their rights. But with political parties and government really putting human rights at the center of this period.
So, which of these human rights priorities are the most urgent and why, in your view?
So, Peter, if we look back at President Chakwera's record, and for example, some of the promises he's made around clearing the rubble of impunity, for example, making promises at least at the beginning of his term of removing bad laws from the books, and really doing everything to improve the enjoyment of human rights in Malawi, including opening up civic space and so on. It's worrying that a lot of these promises haven't been fulfilled. So, for example, if we look at the issue of the death penalty, which Amnesty International opposes in all cases, because we see it as a gross violation of the right to life, but it also is really the ultimate cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment. Whilst Malawi is abolitionist in practice, the death penalty remains on the books. So I think it's an opportunity here, especially in light of Malawi's commitment to remove the death penalty off the books, to really permanently remove this punishment from the books. But also, as we know, in the context of Malawi, we've seen that climate change has really had a dire impact. Malawi is one of those countries that is really highly the impacts of climate change. And we've seen how the impact on the right to food, for example, there's been a serious food shortage and crisis in the context of Malawi. So this is an opportunity for the government to take steps really to strengthen its response to the impact of climate change through collaboration with others, and really putting in place firm measures to make sure that people have access to housing, women are protected from the harsh impacts of climate change, but that also the right to food is secured. And finally, maybe one of the things that we think is really important, in the context of the rights of refugees in Malawi, we've seen that the law itself in Malawi is not in line with international human rights. It severely restricts refugees' right to work, refugees' right to freedom of movement, and is overall really outdated and ineffective. So that is a chance for the government to review these laws and bring them in line with international human rights standards. But also, finally, Peter, on the rights of marginalized people, including the rights of women, for example, we see that women in Malawi don't have access to sexual and reproductive health services. And this is largely due to the laws, for example, which criminalize abortion. And so women can't access safe abortions and other sexual and reproductive health rights, goods and information. So it's really a chance for the government to bring its laws in line with not only international human rights standards, but also the Constitution of Malawi, which really entrenches a lot of human rights that people need to enjoy.
I guess also, I mean, beyond laws and policies, there are issues like food insecurity and living standards that affect human rights. How are these linked to the priorities in the Amnesty's manifesto?
So these are definitely linked because, Peter, all the human rights are really interlinked. So people, for example, will exercise their right to freedom of peaceful assembly through protest. And when you look at that, it's usually linked to people wanting jobs, better living conditions, and so on. So all of it is rooted in the enjoyment of economic, social, and cultural rights, where people are not able to even enjoy their rights to assemble and other rights because these particular economic, social, and cultural rights have been restricted. And as I've mentioned, in the context of climate change, it becomes really important for government to take robust action to really respond to the impact of climate change, including ensuring that those responsible for the impact of climate change contribute, because obviously richer nations are largely responsible for some of the impacts of climate change, but then poorer countries like Malawi would probably bear the brunt, the harshest brunt, and especially, as I've said, for women who find themselves displaced, exposed to sexual violence and other harsh impacts, including food and housing and so on. So all these rights are interlinked, and it's a priority for the government to work with other nations, work with other institutions to really work towards accessing the resources to ensure that people are able to enjoy their fundamental rights to an adequate standard of living, including, safe housing and food and so on.
Khanyo, that's where we'll leave it for today. Thank you so much indeed for joining us and highlighting those very important human rights issues.
Thank you for having us, Peter. And our core call is really that the government of Malawi must ensure the enjoyment of human rights before, during, and after the elections, and take up this opportunity to make sure that the lives of Malawians are improved by securing human rights for all.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. That's Khanyo Farise, who's a senior researcher on Civic Space at Amnesty International for East and Southern Africa.
Heritage Month is